My name is Karim Davani. I was once a proud Major General in the dreaded Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Raised as a devout Muslim, taught to pray 5 times a day, and serve both Allah and my country with all my heart. I followed every rule, honored every command, and believed I was living the right way. Then I met Jesus, and everything changed. I lost my rank, my home, and nearly my freedom. But what I gained was far greater, a love so real it was worth losing everything. I was born in 1975 in a dry, windswept coastal city called Tabriz, on the Sulamar coast of Iran. The air always smelled of salt and engine oil, and the sun was so hot it could burn through your sandals before noon. Our home sat behind a line of old stone walls, tucked between a row of fig trees and a cluttered marketplace. I was the second of 4 sons in a close-knit family that followed tradition to the letter. My father, a man of firm hands and quiet strength, ran a shop selling lentils, dates, and cooking spices. My mother was soft-spoken but devout, and every day she would lay out her prayer rug and whisper words to the heavens with deep sincerity. From as early as I can remember, I was taught that our purpose in life was to serve Allah, obey the laws of Iran, and bring honor to our family name. In our neighborhood, prayer was not a private matter. It was the rhythm of life itself. 5 times a day, the call to worship would echo from every direction, rising above the noise of goats, merchants, and busy streets. My brothers and I would stop whatever we were doing, wash our faces and hands, and face the direction of the Grand Mosque. I remember watching my mother bow her head, her eyes closed tightly, her lips forming each word with care. I tried to copy her as best as I could, but even as a child, I often felt like I was pretending. The words were on my tongue, but they never seemed to reach my heart. It was not that I didn't believe in what I was taught. I simply felt like there was a wall between me and the Allah I was supposed to know. But in Iran, we didn't ask such questions. The Muslim faith was not something to doubt. It was something to obey. My father was strict but fair. He was a man of principles, and he believed in structure, religion, and silence over argument. A man does not bring shame to his bloodline, he would say, his voice firm. He prays, he works, he leads. I admired him and wanted to make him proud. He wanted me to rise higher than a shopkeeper, to wear a uniform, to be respected. That became my goal early in life. I was a quiet child, observant and cautious. I followed instructions, performed well in school, and never caused trouble in public. Behind my calm face, though, was a growing storm of questions. I wanted to know if Allah really heard me when I prayed. I wanted to know why I often felt alone when I was supposed to feel close to the divine. I kept these thoughts buried deep. Speaking them aloud could lead to shame or suspicion, even punishment. When I was 10, something happened that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. One afternoon, while playing hide and seek with friends, I wandered into the home of a neighbor named Aram. He was much older than my father, quiet, and known for being different. People said he was a Malorian Christian, a member of a small, often ignored minority in our city. Inside his home, I saw something that made me freeze. A small wooden cross hung on the wall above a faded bookcase. It was simple, just 2 pieces of wood fastened together, but it felt like it was glowing. I couldn't stop looking at it. I asked him in a whisper what it was. He turned to me and said, "It's a sign of love, Karim, God's love." I didn't know what he meant. I thanked him and left quickly, afraid someone would find out I'd spoken to him. But I couldn't forget that cross. It stayed in my mind like a secret I didn't understand. After that day, I became more curious but even more careful. I never told anyone what I saw, not even my brothers. In Iran, Malorian Christians were seen as odd or even suspicious. Children were told to stay away from them. Some believed they followed false teachings or dangerous beliefs. But I couldn't stop thinking about Aram's peaceful eyes and the strange power that little cross seemed to hold. At school, I focused hard. I wanted to please my parents, especially my father. I earned good grades, stood straight during inspections, and avoided mischief. My teachers praised me, and my father's chest swelled with pride when neighbors spoke well of me. "He will be a great man one day," they'd say. I believed them, and I worked hard to live up to those words. But no matter how well I did, the questions never left me. Late at night, lying in bed, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if I was truly seen by the God I was told to serve. By the time I turned 16, I already knew what I wanted. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, was recruiting young men to serve the nation, and I watched our television with awe as rows of soldiers marched through Iran in gleaming black boots and crisp uniforms. They looked like giants, every movement sharp, every command answered. I wanted to be one of them, not just because I admired their discipline, but because I believed it would finally give me purpose. I thought maybe, just maybe, service would quiet the noise in my soul. Maybe by devoting my life to something greater, I'd stop feeling that void inside me. I told my father of my decision. He didn't smile often, but that day, he smiled with pride. "You'll carry our name with honor," he said, resting a heavy hand on my shoulder. That was the moment I began shaping my identity around duty, strength, and loyalty. I thought I had found my path. Joining the Corps was not easy. The training was brutal, especially for recruits from poor towns like mine. We ran until our legs gave out, crawled through dirt, and stood in the sun until we thought we'd melt. I watched many young men drop out, unable to bear the heat, the pain, or the pressure. But I pushed forward. My body ached every night, but I refused to quit. My instructors noticed me, my precision, my silence, my obedience. I was promoted quickly, and within a few years, I rose through the ranks. By 28, I was already commanding patrol units near the eastern border, known for my sharp eye and unwavering composure. My name became one that others respected. My parents received letters of recognition, but even then, even as I wore my badge and barked orders with confidence, I felt the emptiness inside growing deeper. The prayers I had memorized as a boy no longer comforted me. They felt like echoes, hollow, distant, and cold. I told no one of these feelings, of course. A soldier doesn't admit to doubt. A commander must appear certain, grounded, and loyal to the state and the faith. I continued to observe every ritual. I prayed when expected, repeated the same words I'd said since childhood, but I could feel myself drifting. I began to remember Aram's house again. That quiet room, that cross, the words he had spoken. A sign of love. I didn't know why they haunted me. I didn't know what they meant. But I began to wonder more and more. Was it possible that there was something else? Something more personal? Something that didn't require fear or endless duty? I buried those thoughts during the day, but at night I let them surface, quietly, secretly. I was a man of war, trained to fight, yet I was slowly losing a battle inside my own heart. Even then, I never thought I would walk away from everything I had built, my rank, my country's trust, my family's respect. I didn't yet understand that my entire world was about to change, that the questions I'd hidden since boyhood were not weaknesses, but seeds. Seeds of something deeper, something eternal. And one day soon, I would come face to face with the answer I had been unknowingly searching for all along. By the time I turned 30, I had achieved more than most men from my region could dream of. I was now a full major general in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. I wore a dark green uniform with polished badges, my boots shining like mirrors, my name spoken with respect in military halls. Soldiers stood at attention when I passed. My voice carried weight. I could sign orders, plan missions, and command loyalty from the men beneath me. My parents still lived in the modest house I was raised in, but I had sent them money to renovate it. My father no longer had to lift crates or stand in the market sun. My mother's quiet pride said more than words ever could. Everyone around me believed I had made it. I had done everything expected of a man. But I knew something no one else could see. There was still an ache deep inside me that even success could not heal. At night, after the drills were done and the base had gone quiet, I would lie on my bunk and stare at the cracked ceiling. The walls around me were filled with medals, photographs, and maps, but none of it gave me peace. I thought maybe something was wrong with me. Why couldn't I feel what others felt when they bowed in prayer? Why did I walk through life like a shadow, present, but somehow not whole? I kept this pain to myself. Soldiers do not cry. Officers do not confess. I led missions into the desert, trained cadets, shook hands with commanders, and smiled in photographs. But every prayer I whispered felt like words falling into an empty sky. I never told anyone. I was afraid of being misunderstood, or worse, seen as disloyal. My entire life had been about honor, service, and silence. I could not afford to look weak, especially not in a system that watched everything closely. One evening during inspection rounds, I noticed something strange. A younger soldier named Nuri, quiet and polite, was always missing from the evening mosque assembly. He'd offer reasons, equipment checks, guard duties, night patrols. But I began to wonder. One night, long after lights out, I walked past his quarters and saw a faint glow under his blanket. Curious, I knocked and entered. He froze. In his hands was a small, tattered book lit by a flashlight. I asked, "What are you reading?" His voice was calm but honest. "It's a Bible, sir." I expected fear in his eyes, but I saw none, only peace. He didn't try to hide it or lie. I could have reported him. I should have. But instead, I stood still, staring at that book. Something about the way he held it, the way he looked at it, reminded me of that day in Aram's home so many years ago. That cross. I left without saying anything. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Nuri and the look on his face. It wasn't the face of a rebel or a troublemaker. It was the face of someone who had found something real, something I didn't have. That's when the doubts began to grow louder. They had always been there, whispering quietly, but now they started to speak. What if everything I was taught wasn't the whole picture? What if there was something more? I tried to fight these thoughts. I recited my prayers louder, gave more during holy days, and spent extra time reading the traditional texts. But none of it helped. The more I tried to feel close to God through those familiar rituals, the more distant he seemed. I was doing everything right on the outside, but inside, I felt like I was drifting farther away. My restlessness deepened when I saw how some of the younger soldiers behaved. They followed rules, yes, but many of them were hollow inside. They were just going through motions, saying the words, making the gestures, bowing at the right time, but without connection. I began to see myself in them. I had become an expert at appearances. To the world, I was a decorated officer, disciplined and strong. But inside, I was tired. Not physically, spiritually. Tired of trying to reach a God who never seemed to respond. Tired of wearing a mask. And now that I had seen that small Bible in Nuri's hands, something had been triggered. I started remembering things I had tried to forget. The way Aram described the cross as a sign of love, the gentle peace on his face, the warmth of his words. I didn't understand Christianity, but I couldn't deny that it was starting to pull at something inside me. I never spoke to Nuri again about the Bible, but I kept an eye on him. He did his work well, followed orders, and never disrespected authority. But when others gathered for ritual prayers, he stayed behind. No one seemed to notice except me. I wanted to ask him questions. I wanted to know what he saw in that book that gave him such calm. But I was afraid of what the answers might mean. I had built my entire life around service and belief in the system. I had worked too hard to question it now. And yet, the thought kept coming back. What if Nuri had found what I had been missing all along? What if there really was something beyond duty, rules, and repetition? I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to ignore it by burying myself in work. I led field exercises, reviewed training manuals, and inspected border defenses. But the emptiness stayed. The pressure started to weigh on me. I became more irritable, snapping at younger soldiers for small mistakes. I found myself walking alone during breaks, avoiding conversations. Some of the officers noticed. One of them asked if I was feeling well. I said I was just tired from the summer heat. It was a lie. The truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore. The mask I had worn for so long was cracking. My prayers had become silent cries that no one heard. I remembered being a child, watching my mother bow in devotion. I had tried so hard to be like her, to feel the connection she seemed to have. But now, years later, I felt further from God than ever. And in that distance, the image of the cross kept returning. I could see it clearly now, hanging in Aram's house, simple and wooden, yet strangely alive. What had once been a passing memory had become a symbol that refused to leave me. Sometimes I would walk past the military library and glance toward the restricted shelves. I wondered if there were books in there like the one Nuri had. I wondered how many others had secret questions, buried doubts, quiet longings they couldn't admit. The army was a place for certainty, not questions. And yet, my own heart had become a battlefield I couldn't win. I began to notice that my footsteps echoed louder than before. The mess hall felt colder. The barracks seemed quieter. It was as if the whole world was fading in color, while the ache inside me grew sharper. I no longer found pride in medals or comfort in rituals. Something was missing. Something deep, real, and vital. I didn't know what it was. I only knew that I couldn't live much longer without it. Even my dreams began to change. I would dream of deserts without end, of searching for water but never finding any. In one dream I stood at the edge of a dark sea, the wind cold on my face, and saw a light far away, too distant to reach, but too bright to ignore. I'd wake up sweating, confused, and hollow. I didn't tell anyone. Not my fellow officers, not my family, not even myself, really. I just kept marching through the motions, doing what I was expected to do. But the cracks were growing. The more I tried to push it all away, the more it returned. Nuri's Bible, Aram's cross. The whisper that maybe, just maybe, there was a God who didn't ask for perfection, but offered something else. I didn't know what that something else was, but I was starting to want it more than anything. There was one evening I still remember clearly. The sky was orange with dust, and the sun was beginning to drop behind the hills. I stood on the roof of the barracks, alone, watching the wind carry small pieces of trash across the training yard. I thought of how far I'd come, from a boy running through market streets to a major general in a powerful army. And yet, I felt like I had lost myself somewhere along the way. I closed my eyes and tried to pray, but no words came. Instead, I whispered, "Are you even there?" I wasn't sure who I was speaking to. Maybe the God I had been raised to fear, or maybe the one I had seen in glimpses through other people's eyes. Either way, the silence that followed was louder than I expected. And in that silence, I felt the cross in my memory stir once more. Not long after that evening on the rooftop, something unexpected happened that would change the direction of my life. I met a woman named Liana Veros. It was in the open-air market of Tabriz, not far from where I grew up. She was standing at a fruit stall, bargaining with the vendor over a handful of pomegranates. Her voice was calm, but full of confidence. She wore a plain dress and a scarf tied around her head, and there was a peace in her eyes that drew me in. I didn't speak to her that day, but I found myself watching her from a distance. I asked a friend later who she was. "She's a Malorian," he said with a quiet voice. "A Christian. A school teacher, they say. Keeps to herself." The word Christian stirred something old in me. I didn't understand why, but I knew I wanted to see her again. A few weeks later, I saw her again, this time outside a bookshop near the town square. She was carrying a small stack of children's books and looked like she had just finished work. I don't know what came over me, but I greeted her. She looked surprised, then smiled and said hello back. We talked for only a few minutes, but there was something warm and sincere about the way she spoke. There was no fear in her eyes, no need to impress or hide. Over the next few months, we met more often, always in public, always carefully. I learned she had grown up in a quiet Christian family, had lost her father young, and now taught language and history at a small private school. She never tried to preach to me or force her beliefs on me, but every time she mentioned Jesus, her voice became soft, like she was speaking about someone she truly knew, not just a name in a book. Our conversations became more personal, and I found myself opening up in ways I never had before. I told her about the military, my upbringing, my sense of emptiness. I didn't say much about my doubts, but I think she sensed them anyway. One evening, as we sat under a tree near the city park, I asked her why she always seemed so calm, even with everything happening in Iran. She looked at me and said, "Because I know who walks with me." I didn't understand what she meant. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn book. "It's the Bible," she said, "my comfort since I was a child." I didn't touch it, but I kept looking at it. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. That kind of closeness to God, was it even possible? I had never heard anyone speak about faith that way, not even my own mother. Despite the risk, I asked her to marry me. I knew it would bring trouble. A major general marrying a Malorian Christian was not common, and many would see it as dishonorable. But I didn't care. I needed her honesty, her peace, her presence. We were married quietly in early spring. The ceremony was small, just close friends and family. My parents came, but they were uneasy. My father didn't speak much, and my mother stayed quiet through the evening. Still, I was happy. Liana moved into my apartment near the base. Life didn't become easier, but I felt something I had never felt before: hope. At night, she would pray out loud beside me. Her words were not scripted or forced. She spoke like she was talking to a friend. "Thank you, Jesus, for Karim, for our home, for this life," she'd say. I lay there in the dark, listening, feeling a hunger I couldn't explain. One night, after a long day at the barracks, I came home to find her reading in the small corner near our window. The light from the lamp fell softly on her face. She looked up and asked if I was okay. I didn't answer at first. Then I asked her, "What's in that book?" She held it up with a small smile. "Truth," she said. I sat beside her. My hands were rough from years of drills, but they trembled slightly as I took the book from her. She had marked a page and said, "Start here." It was from a part called the Gospel of John. I read, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." I read it again. The words felt alive. I couldn't explain it, but something inside me shifted. I gave the book back without a word and sat in silence. From that night on, everything changed inside me. I began reading the Bible in secret. I kept it hidden in a drawer under my uniforms. Late at night, when Liana was asleep, I'd pull it out and read it slowly, carefully, like it might break in my hands. I didn't understand everything, but I kept going. The words of Jesus felt personal, like he was speaking directly to me. He didn't ask for perfect prayers. He didn't demand rituals. He offered rest, love, forgiveness. The more I read, the more I realized how different this was from everything I had known. This wasn't about proving myself or following endless rules. This was about a relationship. But with each new word, my fear also grew. I was still a major general. I still wore the uniform of a government that did not accept these beliefs. I couldn't tell anyone what I was reading, not yet. But inside, I knew something had begun. A few months after I began reading the Bible in secret, I was sent on a temporary mission to a remote outpost near the northern edge of Iran's borderlands. The region was dry and harsh, with little more than wind, dust, and long empty nights. I was stationed there to supervise training exercises and prepare for a border evaluation. There were no crowds, no noise, just silence. In that silence, everything I had been feeling came rushing in. One night, after a long day under the sun, I sat alone inside my canvas tent. The air was cold, the wind tapping the flaps like fingers. I laid my Bible on my lap, stared at it, and whispered, "If you are real, I need you now." I wasn't sure who I was talking to, God, Jesus, or just the wind, but I was broken. My voice trembled as I said, "I'm lost. I don't know who I am anymore. Help me." That night, I fell asleep with the Bible still near me, and something happened that I will never forget. In the dream, I stood in the middle of a wide field, surrounded by quiet air and soft light. In front of me stood a man dressed in white. His face was calm, his eyes full of both fire and kindness. I didn't feel fear, I felt peace. He looked at me and said, "Karim, follow me." His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed deep inside me like thunder. I fell to my knees in the dream and wept. Not because I was afraid, but because I felt something I had never felt before. It was like the chains I had carried all my life had suddenly broken. He reached out and touched my shoulder, and in that moment, I felt clean, free, and seen. When I woke up, tears were on my face and my chest felt light, as if I had been given a new heart. The following morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the dream. Everything looked different. The trees, the sky, even the dirt beneath my boots felt more alive. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. But I knew in my soul that I had just met Jesus. Not as an idea or story, but as a person. When I returned to Tabriz, I told Liana what had happened. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she hugged me tightly, tears running down her cheeks. "I've been praying for this," she whispered. I told her I was ready to believe, really believe. That I didn't just want to read, I wanted to follow. She smiled through her tears and said, "Then it's time you speak with Pastor Gideon." That evening, she took me to a house not far from ours. The windows were covered, the lights dim. Inside, I met Pastor Gideon Aras for the first time. He listened carefully, nodded often, and said, "Karim, are you ready to follow Jesus no matter the cost?" I looked at him, then at Liana, and I knew the answer. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake, it felt solid. That night, in a hidden back room of the house, I was baptized. There was no crowd, no music, no cameras, just a large basin, a few believers, and the Spirit of God. As the water ran over me, I felt like a soldier being given a new mission. The old Karim, the one who lived for medals and ranks, was gone. In his place stood a man who finally knew what it meant to be loved. Pastor Gideon prayed over me, and Liana held my hand the entire time. When it was over, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because my face had changed, but because the emptiness was gone. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in my life, I had peace. Living as a Christian in Iran is not easy. Being a major general in the military and secretly following Jesus is even harder. From that day forward, I became two people. On the outside, I was still Major General Davani, strict, disciplined, and loyal to the Guard Corps. On the inside, I was a servant of Christ, learning a new way of life one step at a time. I couldn't speak about my faith in public. I couldn't carry the Bible openly or attend church in daylight. I had to pray in whispers, behind locked doors. But I didn't mind. The peace I had found was worth it. At night, Liana and I would kneel beside our bed and pray. Sometimes we prayed for protection. Sometimes we just gave thanks. Our apartment became our place of worship, our safe space in a world that did not understand. I wore a uniform by day, but by night, I belonged to someone greater than any government. It wasn't long before my new faith began to touch the lives of others. One day, after a long training session, a young soldier named Soran came to my office. He looked nervous, his hands shaking. He said he needed to talk in private. I closed the door. He pulled out a small book from under his shirt. It was a Bible. "Sir," he whispered, "is this real? Is Jesus really who they say he is?" My heart pounded. I had a choice. I could turn him away, keep my secret, and protect myself. Or I could share the truth. I looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, Soren, he is real. He is the truth." I told him my story, from the rooftop prayers to the dream in the field. He listened with wide eyes, tears forming. That night, in that same room, I prayed with him. Days later, he asked to be baptized. I brought him to Pastor Gideon. Watching Soran be baptized reminded me of my own journey. His eyes were full of the same peace I had found. I knew then that following Jesus wasn't just about me. It was about sharing the light I had received. But with that light came danger. Every soul I led closer to Christ was another risk added to my life. The government didn't just dislike Christianity, they saw it as betrayal. If they discovered my conversion, my career would be over. Worse, my family could be punished. I began to notice strange looks from some officers. A few times, I came back to my office and found my desk slightly moved. Once, during an inspection, an officer asked why I didn't attend Friday mosque gatherings as often. I made up an excuse about fatigue, but I could tell he didn't fully believe me. The walls were closing in, and I knew it. I prayed even harder for strength. At home, Liana remained my anchor. Her faith never wavered. She spoke about Jesus as if he was standing right next to her. She reminded me daily that we were not alone, but I couldn't help feeling the weight of our secret. We had 2 young sons by then, Elias and Jonah. Their laughter filled our home, their small voices always asking questions. "Why do we pray differently, Baba?" Elias once asked. I didn't know how to answer without placing them in danger. I kissed his forehead and said, "Because we follow the truth, my son. But sometimes the truth must be quiet." At night, I'd sit beside their beds, telling them stories, some from memory, some from the Bible. I wanted them to know Jesus, even if I couldn't say his name too loudly. But every time I heard footsteps in the hallway or saw strangers near our building, I wondered if our time was running out. The hardest part of this double life was knowing that at any moment, everything could be taken from us. I could be arrested. Liana could be harassed. Our children could be shamed. And yet, despite the fear, I never wanted to go back to the life I had before. The emptiness, the pretending, the cold prayers with no voice on the other end. I had left all that behind. What I had now was real. Even if I had to keep it hidden, even if I had to whisper it, I knew Jesus was with me. In the quiet of night, when the city slept and the world outside our apartment felt too dangerous, I would open my Bible and read the words that first called me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Those words were no longer ink on a page. They were the light that guided every step I took. They were the fire that kept my soul alive. It was a quiet evening in early autumn when the storm finally came. I had been living as a secret believer for nearly 14 years, attending house church meetings in dark rooms, with the windows covered and the lights dimmed. That night, we gathered in the home of a trusted friend to share songs, scripture, and prayer. Liana stayed home with Elias and Jonah. I had promised to return by morning. The room was filled with soft voices and the smell of tea and old blankets. Pastor Gideon stood near the front, sharing a message from the gospel. I felt full of hope, surrounded by others who carried the same quiet flame in their hearts. But just as we bowed our heads in prayer, the front door burst open. Loud footsteps, flashlights, shouts. Soldiers rushed in, shouting orders, rifles raised. I didn't resist. I raised my hands slowly, my heart pounding. I had known this day might come. The soldiers moved fast, yelling at us to kneel, searching the room for Bibles and songbooks. I recognized their uniforms, men trained like I was, but now standing on the other side. One officer pulled me to my feet and asked, "Are you Major General Davani?" I nodded without speaking. My throat was dry. They handcuffed me tightly and marched me outside, past stunned neighbors and into a waiting van. I caught one last glimpse of Pastor Gideon, his head bowed in silent prayer. I sat in the van, chained and silent, listening to the engine roar to life. My mind raced. What would happen to Liana? Would the boys understand where I had gone? The ride was long and dark. We arrived at Evin Prison, a place known across Iran for its harsh treatment of political and religious prisoners. The heavy gates opened, swallowing me whole. Inside, everything smelled of metal, dampness, and something harder to describe: fear. They threw me into a narrow cell with cracked concrete walls, a thin mattress, and a single bulb that flickered above. The first days passed slowly, with no answers and no contact. I wasn't allowed to call Liana. No lawyer, no official charge, just silence and cold. Then came the interrogations. I was dragged into a windowless room and faced by 3 officers in plain clothes. "Why did you betray your oath?" one asked. "Why follow this foreign religion?" another added. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My heart was pounding too loudly. When I stayed quiet, they shouted louder, slammed their fists on the table, and threw my military record on the floor. One of them held up a copy of the Bible they had found at the raid. "Is this yours?" I nodded. "Do you deny following Jesus?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. His eyes narrowed. "Then you've signed your own sentence," he said. I was led back to my cell. The weeks that followed were a blur of questions, isolation, and exhaustion. I was questioned day after day, accused of betraying the state, of bringing shame to the military, of turning my back on the high faith. My rank, my years of service, the honors I had earned, they all meant nothing now. I was no longer Major General Davani. I was prisoner 2047. I was stripped of my pension, my uniform, and my dignity. I wore old clothes stained with sweat, slept on a blanket that smelled of mildew, and was fed cold rice and stale bread. Some guards mocked me. Others ignored me. But none showed kindness. I kept quiet, held my Bible close, and recited Psalm 23 under my breath every night. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The words gave me strength, especially on the days when I thought I would break. I missed my family deeply. I wept in silence for Liana and the boys. Months later, I was taken to a military court in the capital city of Tehran. The courtroom was gray and cold, filled with soldiers and government officials. I stood before the judge, my hands shackled, my back straight. They accused me of deceiving the army, of hiding my Christian faith while in service, of being a threat to national order. I tried to speak, but the judge cut me off. He read from a long report, then gave the sentence: 3 years in prison, removal from all military status, and permanent loss of benefits. My career was officially over. I had nothing left. But even as I stood there in disgrace, I felt no regret. I thought of the dream in the field, of the man in white who had called me by name. I remembered that peace. I whispered a prayer under my breath. "Jesus, I am still yours." They returned me to Evan to begin my sentence, but the worst was not over. A second trial was scheduled, this time in my home region of Tabriz, under the religious court. The charge was apostasy, leaving the faith of my birth, and proselytizing, or spreading a banned religion. Under Iran's laws, this charge could bring the death penalty. I was terrified. Not for myself, but for Liana and the children. What would happen to them if I was taken away forever? Would they be forced to leave our home? Would Elias and Jonah be mocked at school? As the trial approached, I began to pray harder than ever. I would kneel on the hard floor of my cell, tears soaking the cement, and whisper, "Jesus, I trust you, but I'm afraid. Please don't let my family suffer." I asked for a miracle, even though I didn't know if one would come. But somehow, even in the fear, I felt a quiet warmth in my chest, a presence that never left me. The courtroom in Tabriz was small and tense. The judge, a stern man with deep lines on his face, stared at me for a long time before speaking. The prosecutor listed the charges. "You left Allah," he said. "You led others away. You baptized a soldier. You taught forbidden texts." I didn't deny any of it. I stood tall and said, "Yes, I follow Jesus. He is the truth." The room fell silent. The judge looked at me long and hard. Then he said something I did not expect. "No charges apply under current law," he declared. "You are free to return to state custody." I didn't understand what had happened. Later I learned that believers from across the world had heard my story. They had prayed, written letters, and raised their voices. The pressure had grown too loud to ignore. What happened that day was nothing short of a miracle. Jesus had answered my prayer. They returned me to Evan to serve out the remainder of my first sentence. I no longer feared death, but the days were long. I missed sunlight, freedom, and the sound of my sons laughing. I found comfort in unexpected places. One evening, a guard, young, maybe just 20, slipped me a piece of bread after a day without food. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged and said, "You don't seem like a criminal." In that small act of kindness, I saw Jesus again. I began to speak quietly to other prisoners, men who had no hope, no family, no future. I shared my Bible. I told them about the shepherd who walks with the broken. One man, a thief named Darian, listened closely. "Even me?" he asked. "Would he love someone like me?" I nodded. "He loves us all." That night we prayed together in the shadows. It was quiet but powerful. The cell felt warmer after that, brighter even without light. In the hardest moments, I would take out a scrap of paper given to me by another prisoner. On it was written Psalm 23. I kept it under my thin mattress and read it again and again. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." I said those words so many times they became part of me. They carried me through the loneliness, the hunger, the pain. Sometimes I cried until sleep came. Sometimes I lay awake all night, whispering prayers for my wife and sons. But even when the tears dried and the silence returned, I never felt alone. Jesus was with me in that cell, in the rusted bed frame, the cracked wall, the tiny sliver of sky I could sometimes see through the bars. He was there when I had nothing else. And because of him, I endured. When the gates of Evin prison finally opened, I stepped into the sunlight, feeling both free and fragile. It was the year 2007, and I had served 3 full years behind bars. My legs were weak, and my body had lost weight, but my spirit was stronger than it had ever been. Waiting just outside the gates stood Liana. Her hair was tucked beneath a scarf, her eyes red with tears, and beside her stood Elias and Jonah, now older and taller. They ran to me, calling Baba, and wrapped their arms around my waist. Liana's hands trembled as she held my face, whispering, "You came home." That moment felt like heaven on earth. I had lost everything the world once gave me: rank, title, comfort. But I had found something greater. Jesus had brought me back not only alive, but ready for something new. I didn't know what it would be yet, but I knew I would not waste it. Life after prison was not easy. The military had erased my records. Our government housing was gone. We moved into a small 2-room apartment near the port of Tabriz, where the scent of salt and oil hung thick in the air. Liana worked as a school tutor, earning barely enough to cover food and rent. I looked for work, but few employers would take in a former prisoner known for apostasy. I carried boxes at the dock. I repaired fishing nets. I took whatever job I could, even if my hands bled and my pride stung. At night, I would wash up in a basin and sit with my family to eat rice and lentils. It was a far cry from the days of polished boots and lined-up soldiers. But I felt something I had never felt in the barracks: joy. Our home was small, but it was full of faith, and that made it rich beyond what money could measure. We began to grow again as a family, not just in number, but in spirit. Each evening, we gathered in the corner of our apartment where a small oil lamp glowed. We read scripture softly, shared what we were learning, and prayed over each other. Elias had questions, so many questions, and I answered each one patiently. Jonah loved the parables, especially the one about the lost sheep. "That was you, wasn't it, Baba?" he once said. I smiled and nodded. Yes, and Jesus came for me. Liana would lead our songs, her voice gentle, her eyes always closed in worship. Slowly, our home became more than a refuge. It became a classroom of the heart. I knew then that my greatest responsibility wasn't just to survive, but to lead my family in truth. I wasn't a major general anymore, but I had sons to raise and a savior to serve. The past had broken me, but grace was building me again. It wasn't long before Pastor Gideon found me. He had survived his own arrests and had continued to lead the underground church with great care. We met one evening in the same dimly lit room where I was baptized years before. He looked older, his beard more gray, his eyes tired but kind. "Karim," he said, "we've missed you. Your faith strengthened many inside and outside the prison." I told him I was ready to help again, in whatever way I could. He asked me a question I didn't expect. "Will you serve as a lay pastor?" I hesitated. I still felt like a broken man. I had no formal training, no title, no certificates. "All I have is my story," I told him. He smiled and said, "That's more than enough." I said yes. That night I returned to the underground church, not as a new believer, but as a servant ready to guide others through the same fire I had walked through. Leading others in secret was both a blessing and a burden. We could not meet in the same place twice. We changed homes weekly. Every curtain had to stay drawn. Our voices never rose above a whisper. Still, they came. Men and women, young and old, filled with questions, with pain, with curiosity. One evening, a young woman named Mayam came. She was wearing a headscarf tightly wrapped around her head, and her hands trembled as she sat down. I could see fear in her eyes. After the gathering, she pulled me aside. "I've been reading the words of Jesus," she whispered, "but I don't know if it's true. Can he really love someone like me?" I shared my story with her, my doubts, my dream, the prison cell, the miracle verdict. Her tears flowed as she listened. That night, she gave her life to Christ. A week later, I baptized her in a quiet courtyard with water from a garden tap. It was holy. Teaching others while living under threat required courage I did not always feel. At times, I would see men in uniform standing near the apartment complex and wonder if we had been found. Once, during a prayer meeting, a loud knock on the door froze everyone in place. We waited in silence, our hearts racing, until the knock passed. Every gathering could be our last. But we did not stop. We couldn't. The truth of Christ had changed our lives, and hiding it felt like trying to stop the sunrise. Liana stood beside me through it all, her faith stronger than ever. She would say, "Jesus never promised safety, he promised his presence." I held on to those words on the hard nights. When the fear crept in and I thought of our boys growing up in danger, I would open the Bible and find strength in his promises. Our church may have had no walls, but our hearts were full of fire. One night, something happened that tested me in a way I didn't expect. A man came to one of our secret meetings. He stood at the back, face lowered, his hands clasped. When the gathering ended, he waited until everyone left, then stepped forward. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized him. His name was Basir. Years earlier, he had reported me to the authorities. His words had triggered my arrest. My time in prison had started because of him. I stiffened as he looked at me, his eyes filled with shame. "Karim," he said softly, "I was wrong." He dropped to his knees. I didn't understand. "But I've been reading. I want to believe what you believe." My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to walk away. But then I remembered Jesus' words. "Forgive, and you will be forgiven." I knelt beside him, placed my hand on his shoulder, and said, "I forgive you, Basir. Jesus forgives you too." In that moment, something in me broke, and something else healed. I had carried anger like a secret burden, hidden deep beneath all my faith and teaching. But forgiving him set me free. Basir wept like a child. We prayed together, and that night he began a new life. That moment reminded me that this mission wasn't about revenge or fear. It was about redemption. Jesus didn't just save me from punishment. He saved me from myself. He had given me a new identity, not based on medals or titles, but based on love. And with every person I baptized, every home I visited, and every whispered prayer I led, I understood more clearly what my calling truly was. I was no longer a major general in an earthly army. I was now a shepherd in a field of broken people, showing them the way to the one who had found me long ago. Not long after I forgave Basir and welcomed him into our church family, something unexpected began to happen. Word of my story, once hidden in the shadows of Iran, started to spread beyond our borders. I didn't know how it began. Perhaps through one of the letters smuggled out by travelers or whispered through networks of believers. But soon, messages began arriving from other countries. Friends of friends, strangers from across the sea, and pastors from distant churches wrote letters to our little house fellowship. Some were typed, others handwritten, but they all carried the same message. We heard what Jesus did in your life, and we are praying for you. Each time I held one of those letters in my hands, I felt overwhelmed. I had never seen these people, never spoken their names, yet they were lifting us in prayer, standing with us in our secret places. It gave me strength I didn't know I needed. One letter came from a woman named Ruth in a town I had never heard of in Northern Europe. She wrote, "Brother Karim, your faith has helped me find courage again. I read your story during a hard time in my own life, and it brought me back to Jesus." Another came from a young man in South America. He said he had been close to giving up, feeling like God was far away. But when he read how Jesus had visited me in a dream and brought me peace in prison, he believed again. I wept when I read these letters, not because I felt proud, but because I felt small. I never imagined that my quiet steps in the dark corners of Iran would echo across the world. I had simply followed the voice that called me. I had whispered his name in fear. But now people on the other side of oceans were whispering prayers for me in return. I realized then that the power of a testimony is not in how loud it is, but in how true. I hadn't shouted from a stage or preached in a stadium. I had suffered in silence, worshipped behind curtains, and taught scripture under the threat of prison. Yet somehow, Jesus had taken that quiet obedience and turned it into something bigger. Our church remained small and hidden, but it was now connected to a family I had never met, a family of believers around the globe who had found hope in our survival. And so I kept going. I visited homes by night, taught from scripture in low voices, and led others to baptism in gardens, bathrooms, and back courtyards. Each soul was a miracle. Each life was a reminder that the gospel could not be chained. I had lost everything that once gave me identity, but I had gained something the world could not take: purpose rooted in truth. I remember one evening in particular when we met in a narrow basement beneath an old bookstore. The walls were damp, the air smelled of dust and oil, and the only light came from a single lamp placed on a crate. There were 12 of us. Some were new, others had been following Jesus for years. I shared the story of the dream again, the man in white who called me by name. After I finished, one man in the group stood and said, "I was a soldier too. I did terrible things. Can Jesus forgive me?" I looked at him and said, "He already has. That's why he's calling you now." That night he surrendered his life to Christ. Moments like that reminded me why I kept risking everything, not for recognition, not for applause, but because I knew what it was like to be lost in the dark, and I wanted others to know the light that had found me. As I taught more people and watched their lives change, I began to understand that God had written a new name on my life. I was no longer defined by my past, by the uniform I once wore, or the prison I had survived. I was no longer just Major General Davani. I was now a servant of the King, called not to lead armies, but to lead hearts to the truth. Every scar, every night spent on a cold floor, every tear shed in silence, it all had a purpose. I had been broken, yes, but not destroyed. Jesus had rebuilt me from the inside out. I was stronger in ways no sword or rank could ever give. My mission now was eternal, and the more I gave my story away, the more whole I became. The pain of my past had turned into a platform of healing for others. What once shamed me now glorified the one who saved me. To the seeker who might be reading or listening, I want to speak to your heart. You may be sitting in a quiet room like I once did, wondering if God sees you, wondering if you'll ever feel whole. You may be carrying guilt, fear, or questions you're too scared to say out loud. I understand. I have been there. I spent years trying to be perfect, trying to earn peace through effort and obedience. But none of it worked. It wasn't until I broke, until I cried out to the air in a desert tent, that I finally met the one true Savior. His name is Jesus. He is not a religion. He is not a rule book. He is a person, alive, reaching out even now. He came to me in a dream, but today he may come to you in these words. I don't have all the answers, but I know the one who does. And he is calling you too. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe like me, you're holding back because of your past or because of what others will think. Maybe you've been told that God is far away, angry, or unreachable. I'm here to tell you that's not true. Jesus is close to the brokenhearted. He walks into prisons, into failure, into shame, and brings freedom. He did it for me, and he will do it for you. I gave up everything the world offered me, my career, my title, my reputation, but I received something greater in return: peace, joy, identity, hope. If you're tired of pretending, if you're tired of praying to silence, then lift your heart to him now. Say, Jesus, I need you. That's all it takes, a whisper from the heart. He hears it. He hears you. And once he enters your life, you will never be the same. The pain may not disappear, but the emptiness will. To the skeptic, I say this. I did not grow up believing in Jesus. I wasn't raised to love him. I was trained to fear him, to oppose his name. I followed duty, order, and tradition. I thought I had everything figured out. But I was empty. When I read his words for the first time, it was like someone turning on a light in a dark cave. I didn't understand it all, but I knew it was real. I tried to run from it, hide it, even ignore it. But Jesus kept knocking. And when I opened the door, just a little, he stepped in and changed everything. He didn't scold me. He didn't shame me. He embraced me. If he could reach someone like me, a hardened soldier with doubts, pride, and fear, then he can reach anyone, even you. So don't wait. Don't let fear silence the voice you've been hearing in your heart. He's calling you. Answer him. I don't know what tomorrow holds for me. Life in Iran is still dangerous for those who follow Jesus. Every gathering is a risk. Every new believer is a miracle wrapped in danger. But I am not afraid. My life is not my own. I gave it to him the night I met him in that dream, and he has carried me every step since. I may walk through fire again. I may be imprisoned once more. But my heart is free. My soul is alive. My family is strong. And my mission continues. Every day I wake up and say, Jesus, use me today. That's my prayer. That's my purpose. Not to be famous, not to be safe, but to be faithful. To point one more person to the way, the truth, and the life. To light a candle in the dark, just like someone did for me. And so I end this story with a final word. Not about me, but about him. Jesus is worth it all. He is worth the pain, the loss, the struggle. He is worth the whispers, the fear, the fire. Because what he gives is greater than anything you'll ever lose. If you are searching, turn to him. If you are tired, rest in him. If you are broken, he will make you whole. This is not just a message, it is my life. I am no longer the man I once was. I am not defined by my past. I am a follower of the one who came for me, died for me, and lives for me still. And I will follow him wherever he leads until the very end. Because Jesus is not only the way, he is my way. He is not only the truth, he is my truth. And he is not only the life, he is my life.